To another episode of Homeland Security Off the Record. As always, I have great guest on tonight, Clare Lopez, founder, president of Lopez Liberty LLC, a former CIA officer, and Lieutenant Colonel, retired, Sargis Sangari. Sargis, I have a problem with your name all the time. I'm sorry.
That's okay. A lot of people do.
Oh, they're on tonight. They've been on before. In fact, they were on right before the invasion. So this is an interesting program, a retrospect looking back at what we thought was going to happen or might not happen at that point, and obviously what has happened. The full biographies of both my guests are in the description below, but suffice it to say, they know what they're talking about. I'm just going to throw it out to both of you. As Claire and I were talking before you joined, Colonel, we were on and talked about this right before the invasion. What surprises you from that day? Because we were, I don't think anybody was quite expecting Putin to go through with this. I had suspicions, given his old Soviet mentality, but did he surprise you?
Well, look, I always say no decision is a right or wrong decision. So from my perspective, I cannot say if he's overreached or not. I think what we kind of knew was what would be the ability of the Russian military to be able to conduct this operation. And I think that's where we were a little bit surprised on the fact that they really got bogged down in the region. But I have to tell you, I always knew, and I believe maybe we had covered it, and I stated it last time. I have to go back to the tape, but Putin uses his military to negotiate and achieve his political objectives more than military objectives only. And for us, the State Department represents us for the political pieces. Our military goes out to win the wars. Basically, State Department sometimes kind of slows things down to make sure we're able to achieve the best objective possible politically. The military has to win it right away, short, sweet, and quick. Putin uses his military to negotiate with nations, and we kind of knew he was going to do it. We didn't know at the expense of how he was going to go ahead and be able to use that military. And I will tell you, a lot of people will say that he's lost, and I did say, even if he goes in, he's going to lose. He doesn't go in, he's going to lose. So he chose the most ambitious plan. Yes, the Russian military has lost 30,000 personnel. It has fired almost 1,000 ballistic or cruise missile types from inside, and also from inside of Ukraine, in Ukraine, and also from Russia into Ukraine. He's got 6 cities surrounded. He's going to have to try to force the current government of Zelensky to come to the negotiation table, which he has. It's going to be very difficult for him to be able to get in there and hold those cities, especially if he's going to destroy them. He's going to absolutely get decimated. He's going to be a pariah for the rest of time that he's alive on the earth. The Europeans will never forgive him for what he's done. The nuclear option of the sanctions have worked to basically go against them. 27 nations come together in the EU to, activate those sanctions. It's going to take all of them to deactivate those sanctions too. However, with that said, I will tell you that he's achieved what he was trying to achieve. If you think about it, he was going after the two various different provinces that fall into the Donbass area. Those will be Russian properties in the future. Ukraine is not going to be able to mount anything to be able to fight and dislodge the Russian military from those two provinces and be able to get those back again. If there was ever a doubt, and as I said, I think last time on our discussion, that you had Crimea on the Russian maps as part of being Russia, and on other maps that we had in Europe, it was still part of Ukraine, unless Ukrainians mount an absolute military assault and actually take over Crimea. Now, Crimea from now on, if war ends today, is permanently part of Russia. So you got the Donbass, he's gotten Crimea because he's shown to the world that the territories I took are mine, and period. That's it. He has destroyed the Ukrainian infrastructure, the same Ukraine that wanted to be part of the EU, as Zelensky has signed the paperwork to want to be part of it, and NATO. Even Zelensky has now said that we're not going to want to be part of NATO going into the future. And if Putin was trying to ensure that there were no ability for whatever this future Ukraine looks like to be able to be part of NATO, that has definitely been stamped into, uh, has been etched into rock and stone, as they would say, because you can see that NATO even today, right now, is very hesitant to ever want to support even the Ukrainian president's wants and requirements just to be able to close his air corridors if need be. So he's achieved that ability. So he's put Ukraine in a position where he's killed his men. The women and the children have been refugees. Those refugees will not be coming back anytime soon. It may be decades before the so-called Ukraine can ever establish itself. And with that said, he's brought the Ukrainians to the negotiation table, willing to negotiate with possibly a piece of Ukraine not being the way it was. As Lavrov stated, in the past, there were nations that were divided that got united, and there are nations that were united became divided. And he's basically making the case that we are where we are today. Now, as far as the sanctions are concerned, that have been labeled against Putin, there's always ways around those sanctions. Are they devastating sanctions? Yes, from our perspective, but have they had
Mhm.
any effects on them? He's still conducting his combat operations. He's still moving against Ukraine government. I don't think, to be honest, that he wants to see Zelensky killed because he doesn't want to make him a martyr. So maybe that's one of the things that kind of surprised me initially. I figured he was going to go after him to decapitate him right away. But the fact that he's lived so long, I think maybe he's made that decision that killing him would make him stronger in the future.
Mhm.
So why not just let him stay alive, make a deal, and he's offered ways to de-escalate. Unfortunately, we're not understanding. And when Zelensky spoke in front of the Congress yesterday, the main thing he told President Biden is that you need to be the leader of the world in peace. What does Biden do? He turns around and calls Putin a war criminal. Now, others can say that, okay? Pundits can sit on
Mhm.
TV and call him war criminal, anything you want. But if Zelensky is coming to you saying, "Look, I need you to be a leader in peace," he's telling you, you need to go and negotiate on our behalf with Putin because I'm ready to make a deal. He can't do it. Zelensky can't do it because he's stuck in a position now based on the fame that has been labeled for on him by basically his stance and what the world polities and the West have pushed him to be. It would be very difficult for Zelensky to make any type of a deal with Putin. So that's why it's important to have a person like a President Biden come in and make that deal. But unfortunately, I think Biden's being given some bad advice to continue the bloodshed in Ukraine. As I've said in the past, we dropped two nuclear bombs on Japan. We sat down and negotiated with them. We firebombed Dresden. We sat down, negotiated. Iran and Iraq killed each other. They sat down and negotiated. It was a short negotiation, but they still came to that
Mhm.
table. The North and the South, we killed our own brethren in bushels. We still sat at a table and negotiated. So this war will end at the peace table. It's just that who's willing to take that lead. And I have to tell you, as much as China and Russia are working together, they're closer together. Russia, Putin was trying to counter China. I remember on the 13th of July was when Zelensky picked up the phone day after Putin had written his so-called manifesto, if you want to call it now, and had called President Xi and told him that, Ukraine's going to be a bridge for China and the Chinese conglomerates into the EU.
Yes.
Guess what Putin just did by destroying Ukraine? That's never going to happen. If it does, it would be detrimental. What is Putin still doing? He's still selling oil to the European nations. So he used his military in a very savage way, but he achieved the political objectives he wanted to. And I think part of what I said, possibly last time, he might be happy with just those areas. He may be happy with taking the east of Ukraine all the way to the river, and maybe allowing Zelensky remain where he is, but Ukraine will not be the type of power capability for the next decade that it was planning on being for the EU.
Good points. Claire?
Well, to answer your question specifically, was I surprised by what has occurred in this last 3-4 weeks? To some extent, yes. And the reason is that for the very evidence of what we're looking at right now, which is the Russian army performing poorly, bogged down, the Ukrainians fighting back very effectively, with massive support coming in from other countries of Europe, in particular NATO countries, bordering countries. Even the entire United Nations General Assembly condemning Putin for the invasion and for the war crimes, taking Putin to the International Court at The Hague. And of course, then the massive economic measures, sanctions and otherwise levied against Russia, and specifically Putin himself and other individuals of his senior leadership. For all of these things that have happened, it might have been thought that these would have been something of material constraints on Putin's intent, desire to invade massively the whole of Ukraine. The Donbass in the areas of Donetsk and Luhansk, Crimea is gone. Those were understood to be really de facto on the ground already taken by Russia. But a wholesale invasion of Ukraine, as we're watching with massive human rights abuses, war crimes, no, not expected. And the massive losses by the Russian army, because everybody knew that the Ukrainians would fight to a man, to a woman. For all of those reasons, not just me, but other, I think, astute observers like retired General Jack Keane at the Institute for the Study of War, who I think have been especially astute in their commentary on this whole invasion. Also, Kash Patel did not think that there would be a wholesale invasion because of exactly what we're seeing now, to the detriment of Putin and of Russia.
Mm-hmm. What surprises you the most about what Putin has done? I'm not really that surprised by the massive bombing and just scorched earth policy he's pursuing. I mean, we saw that in Chechnya and Georgia, and that really doesn't surprise me. But is there anything about the way he's been carrying out, or the military has been carrying out their operations, generals being killed, top military generals being killed? They shouldn't have even been in the field. And the fact that the Russian military seems to, well, obviously they didn't have their logistics and their supply lines taken care of, food, water, anything about just the tactical strategy that they've carried out, and equipment malfunctioning and failures, and breakdowns and even old and worn out equipment being used. Any of that surprise you?
Yeah, to some extent. Obviously, there were the prior examples, as you've mentioned, Tony, in places like Grozny, Chechnya, in Middle East battles,
Syria,
Aleppo,
yes.
in Syrian battlefields, for example. But those were not on this scale. They certainly were brutal war crimes attacks. Yeah, no question, just like now. But I think the exceptionally poor performance of the Russian army in all those areas that you just mentioned, Tony, I think that's worse than many of us thought it would be. Not the brutality, not the pounding of civilian targets. We've seen that before.
Mm-hmm.
But the overall poor performance of the army in terms of, what you've talked about, the equipment, the performance of the troops, the equipment, the poor TTPs, tactics,
Exactly.
what was it, trade, the performance, just way worse even than we had thought. Did think, of course, that Ukraine being such a huge country, geographically speaking, that it would have been difficult. Another one of the material constraints we thought would have held back this kind of invasion,
Exactly.
but did not. I mean, Putin is not reckless. He's a killer, he's a thug, he's a war criminal, many things, but he typically had not previously been reckless. This appears reckless. And he will probably, I think, pay with his position. I don't mean necessarily his life, but as with a Khrushchev, a Brezhnev, almost a Gorbachev, I think that he will not remain in the position he's in for as long as he might have hoped, put it that way.
Yes. That wasn't a question I had, but it raises a question. Do you think, either of you, do you think that he's insulated himself physically so well that it would be impossible for a coup, a violent coup, to take him out?
Doesn't have to be a violent coup. It wasn't a violent coup for Khrushchev. It wasn't so for Brezhnev. It kind of sort of was attempted for Gorbachev, but it doesn't have to be a violent coup. It just has to be a complete breakdown, a failure of confidence in his leadership anymore, in the Central Committee, the Politburo. He's out.
Yeah, like I said, he's going to be. I mean, the Europeans are not going to forgive him for this. I mean, he has to still, after this peace, you still have to have a functioning country. You can't have your country be an Afghanistan or Pakistan, I should say, where you have nuclear weapons, but your economy is just absolutely destroyed. And I don't think his economy is going to be that bad because, remember, he's part of the SEO. He's still selling oil to the Europeans with the whole Iran deal. There's money on the table still for him to make. But in the eaches of what he has to get is going to be difficult. And as I said, when you have all the European nations coming together and putting sanctions against them, all of them have to come together and agree to remove those sanctions. And the Baltic states were the main nations that were really pushing for more bloodshed in Ukraine, as Ukraine even wants to come to an agreement with him now to save what they have of their infrastructure and their people. Because they've suffered under the Soviets, and they don't want they want a payback basically. But again, as Claire said, it doesn't have to be. I think some people were hoping that you would have people rise up in the streets, there would be democracy, and then suddenly within 10 years, Russia is in the EU and NATO. So that means that China has been defeated. It's not going to work that way. It's probably going to be more of a reality that he needs to give it to somebody else as far as the reins of leadership is concerned, to appease and bring back Russia to where it needs to be, member of the world polities, with being a little bit more functional than it would be right now. He had maybe 10 years left, life expectancy. He's already past it for what the Russians have in their nation. And, but this has pushed his departure sooner than later. But I will remind folks, I think what he wanted to achieve, he achieved politically. It may not be the way we would like to have seen it done, but he's bled a nation and got it to a point where he's made those markers, which is why he's coming to the table to negotiate now. As far as his army being bled to death, this is one thing that maybe you and Claire would have much broader understanding of it, because I got to tell you, the Russians constantly bleed in combat and battle, and they always win at the end. I mean, literally, if you go look at the statistics in World War II, it was absolutely amazing how many people are lost. And part of that, I think, maybe in his perspective, was as part of the Russian being that, Russian would be proud that we lost 30,000 soldiers in battle in Ukraine to be able to achieve what we did.
Mhm.
But, the younger generations are different. I think what biggest surprise for me was seeing how effectively the social media was used by Zelensky, who was previously an actor, of course, a comedian, and was able to really galvanize the world polities and win the information operational component of this battle, which is really much more bigger than killing that one tank on the ground and a number
Yes.
of those Russian soldiers. And I think that's what surprised me probably the most, seeing this battle unfold, how ineffective the Russians have been in the info ops, unless they don't care about it, because again, at the end of the day, if you achieve your political objective using your military, nobody cares what somebody thinks about you. Maybe he thinks it will help galvanize more people behind him. There's still a lot of people in Russia who like him, whether we don't like him, or
Mhm.
whether he's a pariah or even a war criminal. But you have to prove those charges in the courts. And so, look, the Syrian Christians went through a genocide between 2014 2017. All we got out of it at the end was a non-binding resolution from Congress, which is basically toilet paper. It was worth nothing, and there's nothing in the criminal courts, and nothing even out of the UN that has says we're able to get anything achieved for us in the end. Even Zelensky hinted at it, to where he was talking about a new 24, as far as a different approach to world nations. He was basically saying in those comments that the UN is useless. That system doesn't work anymore. Even if you try to change it, it's probably going to be useless, as it has shown his inability to do anything against Putin that has substance behind it. So maybe that's one of
Mhm.
the systems that, coming out of this conflict, is something we need to relook at. Maybe there's no way we can save the UN in the future. Maybe we have to look at new systems out there, something different that allows us to have a much more capable world nation ability. In this case, these economic juggernauts that sit in Europe, United States, and in Asia, that could maybe have more power over China and Russia for the type of operations they do.
You mentioned the way um, Zelensky has used social media, and uh, I'm going to contrast that with what Russia's doing. And they virtually have shut down uh, all social media in Russia. Which do you think maybe that is why uh, the polls still show roughly half, maybe even slightly more than half of the Russian population or the citizenry support his policies, because there's very little coming in around the cracks of the shutdown of all the social media.
And maybe because, look, when you have certain elements of social media saying that we're going to pull out of there, Facebook saying we're not going to have anybody in Russia be able to access our platform. Somebody can use a different VPN these days. Information is getting in there, but what effect it's having, I don't know. I mean, there's too many variables, Anthony. I don't know. I cannot tell you whether or not that's going to be the
I'll
tipping
tell you
point.
what,
Yep.
I'm smiling because of the very thought of public surveys or polls inside Russia.
And it's inside Russia, exactly.
Yeah, but I will say that both sides, the Ukrainian side and the Russian side, have been hyperactive in slinging disinformation about to make it very difficult for observers who might not be familiar with all the particulars to make heads or tails out of what's being told. It's a forte, of course, of the Russians in terms of disinformatia, but the Ukrainians are no slouches either. So it's been tough, but social media has been, of course, full of information, misinformation, disinformation, and everything in between.
I noticed that there was a deep fake that went viral yesterday, I believe, in which it was a very good one. Although, if you look closely, it wasn't that sophisticated, but it was good enough to pass muster with some people and go viral. Of Zelensky telling Ukrainian citizens that the war was over and that everybody should surrender to any nearby Russian occupying forces, and it went viral. I mean, obviously it was caught, but it just goes to show you that the kind of technology that we have today to be able to. I had predicted that deep fakes were going to become a problem at some point, somewhere, somehow. Fortunately, like I say, it wasn't that sophisticated, but it was good enough that if you just saw it passing, you would, that's a little disturbing.
Well, I actually missed that one, but it seems to me that the Ukrainian people seeing something like that would find it completely unbelievable, over the top, and they would disregard it, which is what I expect they did.
They did. I mean, it was quickly put down. And speaking of disregarding, I'm noticing that a lot more of the information warfare that's being put out by Russia, not only is it, I mean, a lot of it is meant for the West, certainly in the world, but I'm seeing a lot of it is being done for internal consumption. I suspect or would think that it was probably being done to try to stymie or put down the growing unrest within particularly probably the 45 age on down inside Russia.
Anthony, I figured Putin to be a little bit more of a micromanager on issues, but I was surprised that a week prior, you had $300 billion being moved from his Minister for Finance, moving all that money into the European banking systems, and then him invading. It tells me that there was no coordination, and I was surprised maybe in that capacity. How is it possible that if you're a micromanager, you're not controlling these issues? I mean, these strategic issues. So now you have 300 billion sitting frozen in assets. Somebody should have picked up the phone and told the finance minister, hey, maybe for a bank, it is not the best time to send that money out. In that capacity, I don't know. I don't know what is happening internally at the higher levels when it comes to these issues. But these are the chinks in the armor, right? That eventually get you to a point. Really, right now, the one thing that Putin needs is really somebody to come in and save face for him and be able to give him an opportunity to survive and maybe head into the sunset, maybe over the next 5 years, rather than if he was waiting to be over the next decade. That's the only thing that I think he's hoping internally. And I think, look, Zelensky too, he needs a lifeline, because there's an old saying in our culture for the Syrians. They say you got to kill your name before your name kills you. And now now you're stuck. You're this hero of Ukraine, and that is for betterment of your people. You got to make a deal with this devil. But even when you ask others to try to do it, like you did with President Biden just just absolutely goes goes in the wrong direction. So he doesn't have anybody out there who's coming to his rescue. If anything, there are just people pouring fuel on this fire. Here's some more javelins. Why don't you go blow up another tank and then die in in Ukraine, while Putin destroys more of your infrastructure. I mean, we got to get these guys to a table and have a discussion. It would be sad if we're able to strike a deal under the current administration for a new JCPOA, and Russia gets $10 billion out of it as a payment, and there's still fighting taking place in Ukraine. And keep in mind, when people talk about sanctions, the Cuban government outlived the Soviet Union. And they outlived all the sanctions, and they just struck a new deal with China recently for the Belt and Road Initiative just a month ago. So, I know that we're trying to get to a point where the sanctions can really squeeze Putin and the Soviets, but you have to squeeze them at a certain time, because even the Russian people may hate him. When they start getting squeezed, maybe they'll be like, you know what, at least he's our devil. As they said, they see their kids start dying. We put sanctions against the Iraqis. We killed 500,000, children, and Saddam still sat in power until we had to go after him and go to our military.
Yeah. You mentioned Biden. I have to ask, what has and has not surprised you about how the Biden administration has responded? And I would throw in NATO in that mix as well. What has and hasn't surprised you?
Well, I'll say this. I maybe am not so much surprised, but it's good to see, put it that way, that the Biden administration, has tried at least to rally the Western Europeans, the NATO members, led the placing of international sanctions. That took coordination, a lot of it, locking Russia out of the SWIFT system, the banking system. All of that took quite a bit of coordination. And, I know that it wasn't President Biden himself, and it certainly wasn't Vice President Harris, but somebody within that administration, perhaps it was Antony Blinken and the State Department people. But they have been fairly effective in at least rallying those kinds of responses, the financial ones, as well as provision of military defensive equipment and weapons, like the Javelins, like the Stingers, or the ground-to-air missiles of different kinds, and the ammunition that's been required. That's been not bad.
Do you think that there's any offensive or any weapons platforms or systems that we could provide that Putin would absolutely consider a red line that he wouldn't allow to be crossed and might do something even more crazy? I'm just, thinking off the top of my head right now.
Well, I mean, this is why the opposition, and if reports are to be believed, the vetoing by President Biden himself of the provision of those MiG-29s from Poland. That was considered to be escalatory, although how much more escalatory than missiles and other equipment we've already sent, I'm not quite sure. But so far the equipment, the munitions, the weapons that have been provided can be categorized, I suppose, as defensive, right? I heard Sargis talking on a Newsmax clip from just a day ago or so about providing drones, which I think would be a much better idea than manned fighter aircraft. Drones that can perform multiple different kinds of missions, but also the air defense systems like an S-300, or not exactly that, but something like that, or something like the Israeli Iron Dome, whatever the specific configuration might be, but something like that would be enormously helpful and cannot be characterized as anything except defensive.
Yeah. I know in the 800 million package that was, I believe, signed yesterday, among what you're talking about, among some of the platforms and systems that will go over is the is AeroVironment's Switchblade 300 and 600 series drones, which are basically kamikaze drones. It comes in a 2-drone set. One is kind of like the Apache attack helicopter set. You got one that does the ISR, lock on and targeting, and then the other drone carries a payload, a fragmentation payload, and then hones in on whatever it is that's targeted. Those are going to go over. In fact, those have been used in special forces for quite some time. Colonel, you may have dealt with some of those at one point. They're very effective, and they can even be sent in as a swarm.
Well, Anthony Avsov created those in 2011, and then of course the Army picked those up afterwards. But I think one thing that I know we're sending that package over. I guarantee you half the stuff on that package, he could have probably gotten it for 1/3 of the price if he just went to Africa, or even I have to tell you, just gave some cryptocurrency to the Taliban that would have had it in sitting in Ukraine within maybe an hour and a half. So to me, it was a waste because I don't think it answered the question of Zelensky and what he brought to bear in the discussions in Congress. He said, I need my air, basically no-fly zone. If you're not going to give me a no-fly zone, give me an ability to counter it. And as Claire mentioned on Newsmax, as stated, you could put on technologies out there that are cheap, and you could absolutely get into the thinking cycle of Putin committing his MiGs and his, rotary in those areas. I mean, we know what the TTPs of the Russians are when it comes to how they use their air. They're not going to change their TTPs midstream. Maybe they will, but I mean, it's very hard to retrain you retrain your air assets to change how they conduct their, attack rounds. We know what their air corridors are. And frankly, there's a reason, as I stated, that civil aviation doesn't like to have drones up there. Guess what? A cheap drone along those attack corridors that are used in swarm as Claire even mentioned, one of those things with those lithium batteries gets into a MiG's, MiG system. Guess what it does? It just absolutely blows out that engine. I mean, you could blow out an engine using a frozen turkey, for God's sakes. We're not talking about thinking too much outside of the box. I mean, this is what bothers me, and this is for those folks that don't understand what as Americans like me and others sometimes that actually go out there and buy guns and ammo. Because if our Department of Defense cannot think a little bit outside of the box, given the technologies that already exist, there's no way you're going to be able to defend me. So I'd rather have my own defense mechanism at the end of the day. Yeah. If I'm going to die, I'm going to die, knowing that the person who's supposed to take care of me has no ability to think outside of the box. Zelensky says, I need that. You could have easily given that type of a drone capability. What did we give him? We give him the drones that are going to be used to knock out ground targets. Putin is ready to negotiate. He's been ready to negotiate for the past 4 times that he's come to the table to negotiate. And if he's coming to the table and saying, I am negotiating with Zelensky, and he's been at the table 4 times, that means he's recognizing the government of Zelensky. Okay? By just coming to the table, you're recognizing the government that you're negotiating with as a legitimate government. We're not understanding how to help them, or we're doing it on purpose to allow more Ukrainians to bleed, because guess what? China might win at the end if Russia is weaker than it is today. And that's what my worry is, that we are doing this on purpose to where we're allowing China to become stronger in the process. Because now Putin has to not just only give cheap oil to China, which he saw in the long-term contract for very much of a cheap oil, to the Chinese. And I said this last time that, China's going to rake that oil. And then now you turn around and really put him in a position where even if he stays, he cannot counter against China. He's counter against China. He's stopped China from getting into the Southern Caucasus and coming into Ukraine to use as a bridge. That Zelensky wanted it to be a bridge. And when you say, I'm going to make my country a bridge, that means you have to lay down and have the Chinese walk all over you, okay? That's not going to happen anymore, regardless of when this war ends. We need to get to a table on behalf of Zelensky and Putin to make sure we bring peace and end this conflict. And if we do that, I think that's the biggest thing that we would have finally answered that Zelensky needed. Now, I will give one kudos to the current administration, where they started really sharing the intel of what Putin was doing, really with the NATO folks in the open. As far as, when is he moving, how is he moving, what is he trying to do, which axis he's coming on. And I hadn't seen that in the past. I hadn't heard about it in the past. So I think that openness really did help really counter some of the information operations that the Russians may have tried to use. And it gave an advantage to at least the Ukrainians as a whole, that the entire nation has been weaponized now, to be able to counter them along all those axes of advance that they were coming through.
Mm-hmm. On that point, the intelligence was spot on all along. And, ironically, well, not ironically, but if one was monitoring, it coincided with various surveillance platforms in the air above Ukraine right before the invasion and right after. You could almost see something being said preceded by the platforms being there to pick up the signals, intelligence, comment, ELANT, whatever it was. The intelligence was good, and I think it was a smart move. At least I think it was, to release the gist of what the intelligence indicated without getting into sources and methods, to show the world. And by God, he actually did it. He did exactly what the intelligence said he was going to do all along, which I think helped to galvanize NATO and the rest of the world to say, oh, it was good. It was real. And Putin didn't even flinch. I mean, it's obvious that Putin knew that this intelligence was out there, and the whole world knew what was being said. And if he went ahead and did what he was going to do, what the intelligence also said, he apparently didn't even care.
Yeah, he badly miscalculated this time. He's definitely overreached. I don't think he expected anywhere near this much trouble from the Ukrainians or the poor performance of his own military. And that's going to have consequences for him personally, for his nomenclatura around him, and for Russia, unfortunately for the people of Russia.
I want to stay on Russia for just a moment, then I want to get into China real quick. Sort of putting China on the sideline for a moment. After Putin's gone, and let's say that there is some sort of a compromise or a settlement, or Putin just happens to be removed from office, how is this going to permanently change Russia and its system, and how NATO looks at, how the rest of the world looks at Russia?
Well,
in your opinion,
this goes back to those material constraints I talked about before. It was observable, it was knowable ahead of time that if Putin did this in an all-out invasion, as he's doing, of Ukraine, and got bogged down, and the Ukrainians fought back as courageously as they are doing, if all that happened, which was expected, then the consequences for Russia long term would be dire. Diplomatically, the country and Putin himself are pariahs. Economically, it's devastating to the Russian economy. This was known ahead of time. Militarily, they're taking huge losses in Ukraine, which they will have a very hard time recouping. And then, in summing it all up, as been alluded, I think by both of you, Sergeant and Tony, the winner in all of this is going to be China, because Russia will be debilitated. All of this was known ahead of time, and it was why assessments like ISW's and others judged that Putin would not do this, because he's not been typically reckless to destroy himself and his country the way he's doing. And yet then, contrary to those expectations, he went ahead and did it anyway.
Mm-hmm.
And the consequences are dire. And China will pick up the pieces. Yeah. Russia will be beholden to China. China, the roles of Russia and China are being reversed in front of our eyes, whereas the Soviet Union in times past was the lead, was the provider of technology and military and all other kinds of equipment and so forth, and training, and that's not so anymore. China has its own. China has outstripped Russia. China has no need of Russia except for its natural resources: oil,
Mm-hmm.
gas, agriculture, minerals, which are all lying there in Siberia, waiting for the Chinese to take them over. The roles have flipped. China is now the senior partner in that relationship. Yes.
Which leads me to get into China. How do you think China is viewing all of this? I want to put that in the context of perhaps it's still ambitions to take Taiwan. Having seen that the U.S. and NATO and basically the rest of the world came together against, for all practical purposes, what could still be considered a socialist, hint, communist country, or at least political establishment. How is China viewing that? Do you think China thinks that perhaps if they did invade Taiwan, that the West, the world basically, would come against them in a
yeah, absolutely. I mean,
fashion?
Yeah, absolutely. China is looking at all of this with a great deal of discomfort, to put it mildly. Despite the fact that China and Russia had that agreement back on the 4th of February this year, 2022, before the invasion of Ukraine, that included agreements on agriculture and economic and trade and commerce things, military. Looking at their behavior, the response of the senior Chinese leadership, Xi Jinping, or, for example, just a couple of days ago, on March 14 this year, 2022, the Central Committee's senior member of the Chinese Communist Party's Central Committee of the Political Bureau, Yang Chichi, met with our National Security Advisor, Jake Sullivan, in Rome. And it was very interesting. China is walking a very fine line. They don't want to disown Russia. I think they want to own Russia. But neither do they want to, they have no intention of an all-out endorsement of what Putin has done. And if you'll look at the statements that have been made publicly by the senior Chinese leadership, it's about territorial integrity and national sovereignty. And I mean, you can see the self-serving interest in a statement like that as regards China and Taiwan. But nevertheless, there is no full-throated endorsement of Putin or the invasion of Ukraine. And quite to the contrary, I think China may now begin to be looking at Russia as an economic dead weight around its neck.
Interesting.
Oh yeah, they want what they want from it, and Russia has plenty of, as we've said, natural resources. But China is obviously not looking at Russia right now as a positive boost to its own ambitions, its own status, or image. Let's put it that way: image in the world at all.
China almost would seem like maybe China would become embroiled in having to put a lot of dollars into rebuilding Russia, because I mean, Russia, although it's not been destroyed in the same way that Ukraine has,
they're not going to do that.
China's not going to use money to. They don't even use money to rebuild their own infrastructure.
No, I know that, but I'm saying that they would certainly be looking at that now, saying,
no, but what I'm
a lot of money to rebuild this country.
Yeah, no, financially, what I'm talking about is that Russia being locked out of the world financial system, banking system, SWIFT, and all of that, is turning to China for an alternative payments mechanism denominated in the Chinese currency, the yuan, rather than the dollar. Now, we need to keep an eye on this, as detrimental to the reserve currency status of the dollar. But point being that Russia is now looking to China and an alternative Chinese financial system to bail it out or prop it up, or provide a new mechanism for payments for Russia. I'm not sure China thinks this is all that great a situation for China.
It's not.
Anthony, I have to tell you, last time when we spoke, I said, Caesar had just conquered the Gauls. He had come to Rome. They had done the parade for him, and on the evening after the parades were done, he was standing on a hill looking down at the Senate, and he said, "There's no way that this republic's going to survive." So what he decided to do was cross the Rubicon. Now, he lost his life in the process, but it ended in a great expansion for Rome. Now, if you want to look at it from that perspective, that maybe Putin kind of knew, and I think he overreached. He was giving bad intelligence, like we were giving bad intelligence going into Iraq. I still haven't seen a mock-up cardboard cutout of the weapons of mass destruction I was looking for. And then every soldier knows once you cross the LD, everything goes wrong. For God's sakes, I was in the city of heat. We're ready to do our operations, and then somebody does a discharge of a minigun and puts a round into the tire of the vehicle up front. There you go. Now you have to stop and change a tire. Anything can happen. It's a reality of combat. With that said, though, I think it's opened up some possibilities of what may be in the future. Look, I can be assured of knowing what maybe Russia will be with Putin there, because as much as Putin is now, as Claire is 100% correct, Russia has become now the roles have flipped, where China is the lead. China has been in the lead, I would say, since the Shanghai Cooperation Organization was established anyway, which is Russia is a signatorial to it. And in 2015, I wrote the article Power Relations, really looking at this issue. And China, when Wang Yi came to the United States and gave the vision of what China should be, and Susan Rice, who's giving advice to the current administration, tried to actualize China's vision rather than countering with an American vision of it. They were already in the lead. We just had to see what would happen in this case. In the short term, I think Putin, as much as he's lost, he's gained what he was trying to do in the short term for what he was trying to do with Ukraine. In the long term, maybe what was the belief as to countering United States and Europe in this case may have achieved success for the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. If you think about it this way, as Claire said, when the Saudis are telling the Americans we're not interested in talking to you anymore, and they're now ready to go ahead and basically take yuan for oil. And when you are looking at various different systems that are being used to possibly looking at the other monetary values, right now the only thing that the dollar is being used for is still on the trading the oil on the markets. However, with that said, the Europeans pay euro. The Chinese are not paying with the yuan. The Russians are paying in the ruble. What's the use of the dollar? And if you could get to a point where you break the back of the US dollar, with the interest rates just went up again today a little bit, and they will continue to go up, where are you going to be at? At the end of the day, the energy sector is important, where even as the Europeans are sanctioning Putin, they're still buying oil from him. And they even said we can't even get off of oil until 2030. And they don't have a means of replacing that oil. And at the same time, China has tripled their purchase of foods from the United States, where you would have 320 maybe shipping containers moving to China on a monthly basis, are up to 720. In January of 2020, I did an interview discussion with Michael Yon when I had just come back from doing an assessment out of Korea. We knew something was coming out of China. And very specifically in his talking points, he said, there's going to be a global pandemic. And usually what follows a global pandemic, some kind of a major war. We're in a global war. What's going to happen? What's going to follow after that? A major famine. So when I was in October in Africa, even the World Food Program had to leave and go to Afghanistan, because we might be losing 1.8 million people in Afghanistan since we left Afghanistan in that debacle by May. And the World Food Program doesn't even have enough support to support that, let alone the famines are going to be affecting Horn of Africa and East Africa coming up within this year. And how's that going to affect us here in the United States? So it might have given an opportunity now for really taking down the United States on a global level, where, when the UAE is telling you, we're not interested in talking to you, you're in trouble. I had said in a previous discussion that we had that the Near East is changing, and the map may look like where you have Israel with the possibility of those Abraham Accord nations maybe being that type of a counter to China, which is going to be basically the main controller of all of Asia. And with Russia being where it is now, as Claire was mentioning, and if Russia falls into that sphere, at least in the short term, is going to be game over as far as the United States is concerned, as to what effects it has on the global stage, regardless of who the president might be in the near future. Now, the only counter with that would be that maybe, hopefully, we get to a point where if there's a change after Putin and there's a governmental change, because Russia is still a semi-presidential federation. If there's a different governmental structure for Russia, and Russia becomes a full member of the EU in the future, and we're talking about decades down the line, and who knows, even a member of NATO if it wants to, if NATO's still around, then it will be game over for China, because China would be squeezed by all these economic juggernauts. But it's too many variables. Nobody knows where we're going to be. All we could do is kind of look at patterns. Given the patterns, it's possible that Putin may have, with this debacle in Ukraine, had struck a deadly blow to the U.S. and what the dollar is going to look like. If the dollar is no longer the reserve currency when it comes to oil, as Putin was negotiating 3 years ago to get Saudis to push to purchase oil using other currencies rather than the dollar, guess what? What are we going to tie the dollar to? We owe trillions of dollars to ourselves. It's basically will become useless. So he's put us in a dangerous position. As much as we push against our adversaries, guess what? They push against us. Even the Taliban, as much as they're savages and tribal, they're using cryptocurrency right now to do business.
Thank you for that. Do either of you have a cheerful prognosis for the world geopolitical stage in the near term?
No.
I was afraid you were going to say that.
It's been a very steep fall for the United States in the mere 14 months or whatever it's been since the Biden administration took power in Washington, D.C. We all knew that it would be a catastrophe, but we didn't know it would be this bad, this fast. And I don't see the United States climbing back out of the mess that they've put us into until at least the midterm elections of this November 2022 for Congress. That will at least begin to put a brake on some of the worst policies coming out of this administration. But then, another full 2 years, where are we going to be? At a certain point, I think you were saying this, Sargis, you can't even say this is incompetence anymore. This is deliberate takedown of the United States. And when the United States withdraws power and influence from around the world, chaos inevitably follows. And even worse, when there is projected out of Washington, D.C., a perception of weakness, that chaos turns into raw aggression by any and all of the rogues, enemies, and adversaries in the world today.
No, you're right, Claire. Obama stated very clearly that he's basically here to manage the economic decline of the United States, and I think I didn't answer because that was my answer to you. I don't have anything positive to give you. Look, people think that, well, if you have in the next election, maybe somebody like Donald Trump or even him coming back and winning may reset it. I think we're at a stage that there's been so much destruction of the root that all an individual, even like President Trump, could do is kind of hit the brakes on it. Reagan came in and hit the brakes on what was happening. Look where we are today. This is not Reagan's vision. Eventually, our nation is heading into really a civil war, a tribal mentality of people. And I don't know if you're going to be able to recorrect that. Today I'm still drop off my daughter at school, and you have kids as young as my daughter still wearing masks going to school because there's a portion of their parents who are saying put something on that doesn't work. But we were able to train them in believing that that piece of cloth, muzzle that even scientists tell you doesn't work, is something that's going to work for you. There was a poll recently done that questioned Americans whether or not you would stay and fight like the Ukrainians or leave if there was an invasion of the United States, and 57% of a certain party, I won't say which, said that they would leave. They wouldn't stay. So I think the only positive I could tell you is I see a much broader step being taken as far as leadership by the state of Israel. And frankly, I think the state of Israel can't count on us. And these Arab nations who were enemies of the state of Israel a long time ago are actually trusting Israel and supporting him and are signing contracts with him. And the reason for that is because they trust a nation that they had seen as an enemy for decades. And you can't even trust the United States. When UAE doesn't trust you, where are you going to be? When your own people don't trust you, how effective are you going to be? There has to be a holistic, complete change in American perspective of how its governmental institutions need to move forward. I mean, Zelensky can't really trust us. He'll say nice things about it because he's being bombed, but the man asks for a certain type of support, and we give him things that have nothing to do on the same day of what he's asking for. He asked us to negotiate peace for him, and the president turns around and calls Putin a war criminal. Okay, we got it. Everybody got it, but you have to. if you love your nation, you have to maybe, pardon the use of the language. You sometimes need to prostitute yourself for the love of your nation. You have to take the beatings and the bullets to protect and save your nation. And frankly, I don't know if the people that are in charge today are the type of people that are willing to take those bullets for the nation. My answer would be a no for now. Let's hope there's better days ahead for the United States. But unfortunately, the route may be damaged so much. I'm not sure if I'm comfortable right now to say that we're going to have a full comeback, even with somebody like a Trump coming in the future over the next decade to try to save us.
Tony and Sargis, I know that we probably want to try to end on a little bit of an up note.
That would be nice, Claire.
And I will offer this, and that is that across the United States, I am seeing an awakening at the grassroots level by local citizen patriots. And that's where the change is going to have to come from, up from the ground up among the citizen patriots who then begin the movement to take back this republic. And that will go from the ground up. It will not be from the Beltway, the Capitol, the Congress, the top down. It will be from we, the people. And I do see that happening as people become, they're not woke, they're awakened in defense of the republic. And I do see that happening.
Real quick, by saying that, do you think that there's been any effect on the American people by seeing and watching what Ukrainians are doing?
Yes, inspirational at the very least to watch the leadership of a real president leading his people, refusing to leave the besieged capital, out there in flak jacket and helmet with the troops. That kind of example inspires everyone. And I think Americans, and then also just the people of Ukraine, their courage under tremendous stress, slaughtered, knowing that they are the targets of Putin's war crime assault. And then still, anything from teenagers, making Molotov cocktails to grandmas picking up, AKs, to the troops themselves, refusing to give up, fighting every single day, weeks and weeks now, when no one thought they were going to last more than 3 days. Yes, This is an inspiration for Americans. We can all see it. We watch the videos. We watch the screens, the TV, the horrific videos that come to us on a constant stream now. But their courage in standing up and fighting back, and they know what they're fighting for. They're fighting for their independence, for their liberty. And that is articulated not just by the president, Volodymyr Zelensky, but also by members of parliament who have also stayed behind and not fled away, including the women members of parliament. It includes other civic leaders. That's got to be inspirational. And it is, I think.
It is inspirational.
They're articulating it so well, what they're fighting for, not just against invasion and tyranny, but they're fighting for their national sovereignty, their territorial integrity, their identity as Ukrainians. That's inspirational.
Freedom. Freedom. I think ultimately the human spirit wants to be free. It doesn't want to be constrained. Well, I would hope that the whole world sees this as ultimately a war against good and bad, and a war against, I don't want to say capitalism, but democracy and capitalism against a different world that we still have, like the Soviet Union, communism, socialism. whatever you want to throw on it. It's dictatorial. It's any name can be applied to it. But I think the world I hope, is seeing that's what the battle is.
Mm-hmm.
Well,
Yeah.
we hope they're saying it. I mean, look, they're saying it. How is it affecting them? How is it, being processed by them? We don't know. We won't know if maybe sometimes for decades. But I think, as Claire put it so directly, the Ukrainians may have talked about wanting to be free, a different structure in the past. But today they're showing it on the battlefield. So when you sacrifice and you fight on the battlefield, it shows what your true character is, and they've been tested. And I think
They
that
certainly have.
as a positive, yes, Americans, if they're tested, trust me, I'll take down as many invaders as possible in this country
You and me both.
until I'm done. After that, as I told my kids, you're gonna have to deal with it. I can only fight as far as I can fight now. And I think, if we do what we are doing now, even with us, a simple discussion like this, hopefully is influential, and hopefully it helps, and hopefully it awakens the next generation of folks to realize there's a better world when we're in peace rather than under control of others.
Well put. Colonel Claire, thank you so much for coming back to take another look at this after having, before the invasion, not knowing what was going to happen. I appreciate your viewpoints.
Thank you for having us, Tony.
Okay, thank you very much. I appreciate it.